Well, welcome to this investor update for Pharmos Limited. My name's Dr. Michael Thurn. I'm the CEO of Pharmos, and today we're going to walk through an investor update that primarily focuses on motor neurone disease. We have a phase 1 study with data reading out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'll talk a little bit about the veterinary product, but this whole investor update is focused on motor neurone disease, our upcoming phase 1 results that are due in about 2 to 3 weeks. In terms of the corporate overview for the company, we're a mid-stage biotechnology company that's targeting human neurodegenerative diseases. On this slide, you'll see the board and management of the company, and I'd like to welcome aboard Dr. Tom Dufy. He's recently joined as our new non-executive director. Tom has a wide variety of experiences, primarily focused on commercial transactions. So we welcome Tom aboard. Tom is joining the company at a very exciting time, following our phase 1 results from our motor neurone disease study. We look to engage potential partners, and Tom's background in commercial activities, in doing deals, is going to be very helpful and provide the company with a lot of skills in that area to help bring on board a potential partner for Pharmos. Just to remind everyone, Pharmos is focused on a drug called monopental, and we're repurposing that particular drug. Monopental is an approved veterinary product that's been used to remove worms in sheep for many years. We're using monopental, its pharmacology that occurs in mammalian cells called autophagy, to target motor neurone disease. And our lead program for the treatment of motor neurone disease is just at that phase 1/2 junction, and we're in the process of preparing the results from our recently completed phase 1 study that will be announced in the next couple of weeks. Since I've joined the company, which is about 5 months ago, I've put together a very formidable management team. So everyone knows Dr. Roger Ashton. Roger is the chairman of the company. He has a very strong history in pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, and was involved with a number of large transactions. He was also the CEO of Mayne Pharma, and he's on the board of a number of biotechnology companies here in Australia. We've recently brought on board John Clark. John is the Chief Operating Officer of Pharmos. John brings a wealth of experience in managing phase 1 through to phase 4 post-marketing trials in clinical development globally. So John has specifically come on board to manage the next phase of clinical development and complete the current phase, particularly in motor neurone disease, but to move forward and start our adaptive phase 2/3 study in the coming months. Dr. Carol Worth has also joined. Carol has over 30 years industry experience. One of the aspects that we need to start to focus on is that Pharmos is rapidly becoming positioned as a potential commercial company that's supplying product for commercial activities. So one thing that we really need to focus on in the coming years is being in a position to provide product for commercial activities, and Carol will help chaperone those whole programs for making and manufacturing monopental for commercial activities. Our pipeline, we have a strong pipeline in human health and animal health, and I'll just quickly talk about animal health. The animal health program, which focuses on canine B-cell lymphoma, is on a very straightforward pathway from here. We just have to complete a field study in dogs, around about 60 dogs, and we'll look to use that information from that field study to file a new animal drug application with the FDA. In terms of our motor neurone disease program for monopental or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis program, we are moving to a point now where our results will be available from our phase 1 men study in the next 2 to 3 weeks' time. We're hoping from those results that we'll be able to be in a position to do just one more study. That's right, just one more study. So not many Australian biotechnology companies are in a position to just do 2 studies to get potentially an accelerated approval or full approval from the FDA. We are in the next couple of weeks, we will get our results from our pre-IND meeting back from the FDA. That is a very important event for the company in that it will provide us with the exact blueprint that we need to do for the remainder of our clinical development for motor neurone disease for monopental to receive either accelerated approval or full approval. As I mentioned before, our phase 1 top-line results will be due in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we will use that information to go back to the FDA and complete our orphan drug disease designation. In addition to that, we will open an IND for our adaptive phase 2/3 study towards the middle of the year, and we hope to be in a position to start our adaptive phase 2/3 study by June this year. So an exciting time for the company. As I mentioned, this presentation is going to be focused on motor neurone disease, and just to provide you some important statistics about motor neurone disease and the current drugs that are available to treat motor neurone disease. There's no cure for motor neurone disease or ALS, and it's always fatal. And the key statistic on this slide is that the life expectancy for someone from diagnosis is just over 2 years with motor neurone disease. There are currently 4 drugs available for the treatment of motor neurone disease, and motor neurone disease is described as being part genetic and also due to sporadic things like environment. There's a link with potentially the overuse of pesticides. So only 10% of the cases are genetic. 90% of the cases, no one really knows why or the cause of motor neurone disease in those 90% of cases. On the left-hand side of this slide, you can see that one drug was recently approved to treat 10% of those cases, which is in the SOD1 gene. There's a mutation in the SOD1 gene, and Biogen recently received approval for tofersen to treat that 10% of cases. And just to give you a bit of an idea, what's 10% of cases? So that's roughly 300 people will have this mutation in the US every year. In terms of the remaining drugs, Riluzol's been around since 1995, and it only prolongs life by about 3 months. The 2 newer drugs that were approved, one back in 2017, edavarone or radicavia, that only prolongs life by approximately 6 months. And then the most recently approved drug, rilivrol, was approved back in September 2022. It only prolongs life by about 9 months. And this rilivrol really provides us with the blueprint of what we essentially need to do to potentially get accelerated approval from the FDA. This drug received accelerated approval, so based on a phase 2 study in 89 patients, the FDA approved this or gave Amylyx Pharmaceuticals an accelerated approval. Interestingly about these drugs is that radicavia or edavarone is administered IV, and recently the company behind radicavia developed an oral formulation. And just over 2 weeks ago, there was a phase 3 study that was done with edavarone, the oral formulation, and it was shown to have failed. So there's some question marks around really, does edaravone offer any benefit at all? If we go back to Rilibriol, remember it was approved in September 2022. This drug has to complete its phase 3 study. And that phase 3 study for full approval is due next quarter. And there could well be a distinct possibility that this drug may fail. And if it fails, it would mean that Rilibriol would be removed from the market by the FDA. As I mentioned, there's some controversy around these drugs, in particular Rilibriol. It was approved by the FDA, but it was rejected by the European regulators. So an interesting time for the treatments that are currently in use for motor neurone disease. It could well be that in the coming year that we really only have Riluzole for the treatment of 90% of those sporadic cases for motor neurone disease. Quite a sad story. In terms of the pathology and how montepentol can affect the pathology in the development of the disease, motor neurone disease, well, motor neurone disease is characterized by a progressive degeneration of the nerve cells. And in particular, what happens, there's a toxic buildup of a protein called TDP-43. This TDP-43, which is supposed to localize in the nucleus of the cell, for some reason, there is a signal problem, and that particular protein, TDP-43, mislocalizes out of the nucleus and moves into the cytoplasm or axon of the neuronal cell. And when it does that, it forms aggregates. And those aggregates over time build up and cause a toxic event in that it causes degeneration of the neuron. What montepentol does is it's an all-purpose cleaner for a cell, if you like. It uses a process called autophagy to remove these toxic buildup of proteins or metabolic waste. So montepentol promotes or stimulates autophagy in disease cells. And by doing that, it sets up this lysosome-dependent regulated mechanism where these lysosomes are formed. They target the toxic protein, the metabolic waste that are causing the degeneration of the neuron. And this slide just shows you montepentol doing exactly that. So in the panel on the left-hand side here, these two panels that go down the page, you can see in an ovarian cancer cell, the formation of these lysosomes. And in the control panel, you can't see any lysosomes being formed, but when you hit it with montepentol, cells growing in a Petri dish, you can see these large vacuoles. And these large vacuoles are the autophagy process being set up by montepentol. If we look at the second panel here towards the middle, you can see these are glioma cells. So glioma cells are your neuronal cells. And you can see in neuronal cells where these arrows are that, again, montepentol is able to stimulate these lysosomal sacs, these vacuoles that target any metabolic waste or toxic buildup of proteins. Where this becomes important for us is that autophagy can be used as a process that removes or used as a process that targets other kinds of neurodegenerative diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis, or Parkinson's disease. The toxic buildup of protein in neuronal cells is a common pathology for all these conditions. So it could well be that montepentol, not only being effective in motor neurone disease, it could be useful as a mechanism to treat Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, some of these more prevalent diseases other than motor neurone disease. So, quite an exciting way of being able to treat these neurodegenerative disease and grow the market potential for monopentyl. Let's just focus on our recently completed phase 1 men study. And as I mentioned, the results from this study are about to read out the next 2 to 3 weeks. Just to go over this study has been going, or it was initiated back in October 2022, and all patients have now finished that study. And the study was a dose escalating study, and some of the unique characteristics of this study was that we didn't use normal healthy volunteers. We went straight into the patient population with motor neurone disease. And essentially, 2 groups of patients were enrolled in this study, and they were used to sequentially increase the amount or the dose of monopentyl over a 10 to 12 month period. So group 1 of 6 patients, they started at 2 milligrams per kilogram. When the safety monitoring committee deemed that that dose was safe, a second cohort of patients, group 2, again, 6 patients were enrolled in the study, and they received a dose level of 4 milligrams per kilogram. Meanwhile, the group that was on 2 milligrams per kilogram, they continued treatment. When the second cohort, dose level cohort of 4 milligrams per kilogram, when the safety monitoring committee deemed that that dose level was safe, then the group that was previously on 2 milligrams per kilogram, they went up to 6 milligrams per kilogram, and so on. So this study went for a period of 13 months. So there was 12 patients in total that went on to this study, and their first cohort of patients, after the 13 months, most of those patients had received a continuous dose of monopentyl for a period of 12 to 13 months. The interesting thing about this study was that the patients deemed that they were getting some kind of benefit from the drug. So we had to rush to put together an open label extension study so all these 12 patients could continue in a study, continue receiving monopentyl. We announced earlier in the week or last week that we received ethics approval for this open label extension study. This open label extension study will go for 12 months. So we're just in the process of screening these 12 patients to make sure that they still comply to go into this open label extension study. One of the aspects for them to be eligible for that open label extension study is they must still all be able to swallow and take the tablets. In between, or bridging between the phase 1 men study and starting the open label extension study, all 12 patients went on a compassionate use program. And that compassionate use program has been going for 3 months now. So just prior to enrolling in the open label extension study, or as of today, we've had patients that are entering their 16th month of use with monopentyl. And why is that important? Well, it's important from the point of view that when you think about this disease and the average life expectancy for someone with motor neurone disease is just over 2 years. This is quite since diagnosis, this is quite a significant achievement that we've had patients on the drug for up to 16 months and we haven't seen any deaths. So quite a significant achievement for monopentyl, for the company, but also important for the patients that have been involved in this study. Now, the purpose of this slide is just to give you an idea of the results and how those results are going to be presented from this phase 1 study. So typically the FDA is after three things. Those three things are safety. Well, we've only seen 3 adverse events that are attributed to the drug in this study, remembering that the patients have been on drug for up to 12 months in that phase 1 motor neurone disease study. The other thing that they want to see is survival. Survival is an endpoint. All our patients are still alive. So in some ways, we've ticked the first box in terms of safety. We've definitely ticked the survival box. The last thing that they want to see is to get a read of how much fonopentol slows the decline in motor neurone disease. And the scale that everyone uses, and the FDA uses as well, is this amyotrophic lateral sclerosis functional rating score. And this ALS-FRS is a predictor of survival in ALS patients. And what I've shown here is how this scale works. And really the scale is a global assessment of the typical symptoms as the disease progresses in motor neurone disease or ALS. Over a 5-point scale, the patient rates their ability to speak, their ability to swallow, whether they can turn over in bed, walk, climb stairs, whether they can cut food, or how well they can write. So all these symptoms are measured. The patient rates it on a 5-point scale. If a normal person was doing this global assessment, the score that they would get would be 48. Obviously, with a patient with motor neurone disease, won't score a 48. They'll score less than that 48. What then happens is we then look over time how that score declines. And the rate at which it declines gives you an indication of whether you're providing a benefit with your drug. So as you can see in this panel over here, these are the results for Relyvrio. This is, in fact, the results that the FDA gave the drug accelerated approval on. As you can see from the slopes, they were able to show that they had a roughly a 25% slower decline in the functional rating score compared to the placebo. And that 25% slower decline roughly translates into a 9-month extension in the life of those patients when they were on Relyvrio. One thing I will point out on this slide is that the treatment period shown here is 24 weeks, so roughly 6 months. They saw in that 6-month period, in the 87 patients that were analyzed, they saw 5% of those patients die. Remembering from before, all our patients are still alive. When they continued treatment with Relyvrio out to 48 weeks or close to 12 months, another 20% of those patients died. So over a year, roughly, 25% of their patients died in this trial. We've had individuals, patients on drug now for more than a year. We haven't seen any deaths. Remarkable. And just to reiterate that, about 50% of patients with ALS or motor neurone disease live at least 3 years. And the important statistic is this one down the bottom here. Population-based prospective registries report 1-year mortality rates after diagnosis ranging between 22 and 34%. 1-year mortality rates. In our study, we haven't seen any deaths. And this slide just gives you also an indication of the typical things that you see as the patient progresses with motor neurone disease. They start with progressive weakness, whether it's cramps, inability to grab something, they're continually falling over, they have pains in their legs. Then over time, as the disease progresses, difficulty in walking, slurred speech, they can no longer move around without assistance with a wheelchair. There's got to be a caregiver involved. And then one of the more pivotal moments for a lot of patients is the inability to swallow. All our patients have the ability to swallow, even after many months since diagnosis and many months of treatment. All our patients are still able to swallow the tablets. And in fact, for them to be eligible for the open label extension study, they need to be able to still swallow tablets. So all our patients are really only progressed, what, 2/3 of the way from symptom onset to death. Again, an incredible result. So where is all this going? This gives you an idea of the current market for rare central nervous system diseases. Motor neurone disease is a rare disease. It's a rare central nervous system disease. And over the last 2 years, there's been a large number of deals. In 2022, there was roughly just under 50 deals done for rare CNS diseases. For the period in 2023 up to October, so 10 months, there was already 49 deals done. So it's an incredibly active area. And what this slide tells us is that big pharma, mid-stage pharma are actively pursuing assets that treat rare diseases, in particular central nervous system or neuroscience assets. To give you an indication of the deals that have been done specifically around motor neurone disease or ALS, if we focus on the bottom 2 rows here in this table, you can see back in September 2023, Akira-Stem, there was a licensing deal for their asset by Takeda. And Takeda, this preclinical asset hadn't gone into humans yet. The licensing deal was close to $600 million US. So that's a preclinical asset. What about an asset that was similar to where we are? Well, if we look at the next row up, you can see that in March 2023, so roughly a year ago, Biohaven did a licensing deal for a dual tyrosine kinase 2 and JAK kinase 1 inhibitor for motor neurone disease. And that deal was worth close to US $1 billion. It was a licensing deal, 20 million up front, but it gives you an indication of, a similar asset at a similar stage of development that was targeting just ALS. So this is a licensing deal just for ALS. Both of these here shown on the slide are just for ALS. Remember, back to the earlier slide, because we target autophagy and the toxic buildup of protein is common for a range of neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, there is reason to suspect that monopentyl, not only will it be useful in motor neurone disease, but it can also be useful in those neurodegenerative diseases. So coming back to this table, these are just deals done for ALS or motor neurone disease. Is monopentyl, is Pharmos moving up more towards this top row, where Biogen did a $7.3 billion acquisition for multiple assets. Remembering back we have the potential to be used in a range of neurodegenerative diseases. So when the phase 1 results become available, one of the first things that the company will be doing will be starting to engage these companies, these large biopharmaceutical companies, these mid-stage biopharmaceutical companies, to look at whether there's a possibility of partnering, or in fact, whether there is interest out there to acquire a Pharmos. So this is the last slide. And I just wanted to leave you with what's going to happen over this quarter and the next quarter. So in January, we've already announced a partnership with Berry Consultants, and that's an extremely important partnership. Berry, the lead statisticians, they were behind the Healy platform trial. They're currently helping us with our readout for our phase 1 study results. We also announced that we requested a pre-IND meeting with the FDA, and that was granted. We expect those results or those written responses to come back from the FDA this week. We also announced that our open label extension study received ethics approval, and we're currently in the process of screening those patients and hope to report to the market that the first patient has been dosed in that open label 12-month extension study. Then in 2 to 3 weeks' time, we'll announce the results, our top-line results from our phase 1 men study. We'll also look to bolster, to bring on board key opinion leaders that's going to chaperone our next study, which is our adaptive phase 2/3 study that we hope is going to be the only study that we need to do from here to either get accelerated approval or full approval of monopentol for the treatment of motor neurone disease. In the next quarter, we're hoping that our ODD will come through. That ODD is all based upon providing the FDA with our top-line results from our phase 1 study. We'll open an IND with the FDA for our adaptive phase 2 study, and then we look to move towards being in a position to dose our first patient in that motor neurone disease study. So an exciting quarter and next quarter coming up for Pharmos. Well, that concludes the presentation. I encourage you to ask any questions that you may have via Investor Hub, and look forward to providing you with a further update in the very near future. Thanks for your time.